Hello, this is Raoul LeBlanc, Vice President and Chief Petro Nerd at IHS Energy. Today, in What's New in the Data for the September installment, I want to talk about the Buda Georgetown. Now, when we say the Georgetown Buda, what we're referring to is a new play designation. This was previously incorporated into a larger version of the Austin Chalk play, but we've broken it out. And actually, the Buda Georgetown consists of three sets of reservoirs: the Buda, the Georgetown, and also the Glen Rose, where a lot of these wells are Glen Rose. There are three reservoirs that are often tapped together, and that's why we included them in the same play. So as I said, they used to be included here in the Austin Chalk. You can see the footprint is pretty similar. And in this context, really, it's also important to consider a couple of other plays here. I want to talk about the Eagleford and about the Woodbine/Eaglebine. That's our name for this Woodbine and Eaglebine together. First off, let's spend a minute or two looking at the footprint, and I want to focus here first on the numbers here in South Texas. And the brown are the Eagleford wells that you can see, and the blue are those new wells that have been broken out in the Buda Georgetown, and the Austin Chalk here in yellow. Now, the thing I want to bring to your attention is that when you look at the Buda Georgetown in relation to the brown Eagleford, what you see is that it is located on the northern flank of the Eagleford. That's very important because that northern flank is relatively unproductive. In fact, it's dramatically unproductive for the most part because of the lack of reservoir drive in the subsurface. So the point I'm making is that to a large part, the core of the Eagleford, which is more in here, does have Austin Chalk in it. So there are bits of acreage, there are portions of acreage which should have access to both these reservoirs, and as we'll see, it's very, very good in some of those places, right? So the rich are getting richer. With the Buda Georgetown, however, it's mainly relegated to areas of relatively poor productivity in the Eagleford. Second thing, let's take a look here and look in central Texas. So let me grab and go in here. The thing I want to point out here is that there's a good overlap between the Buda Georgetown play and the Woodbine. So you can see lots of areas have access to both of the plays, although there are large portions of this on the outside. A lot of these are vertical wells that I'm showing here, but in general, if I were to, let me see, turn off those suckers, no directionals, you can see there is still a good bit of fairway in which people have access to both the Buda Georgetown and the Woodbine reservoirs. The last thing I want to point out from a sort of locational perspective is that when you look at the play as a whole, the Buda Georgetown goes far up into northern Louisiana and even into southern Arkansas. What it does not do, it does not follow that trend that's starting to become active, particularly over here in central Louisiana, where some people are getting very excited and some people are picking up major acreage positions, right? So again, similar footprint to these plays, but with some important differences. With over 1,500 vertical wells in the play, it's probably worth taking a look at the vertical data. What did that tell us about the play? Well, you can basically see from this map over here, this is what we call a category map. Some of you, it's a heat map, hot is good and cold is bad, but it looks at the peak production from each of these wells, and it shows you everything from a hog, which is 800 to 1,600 barrels a day, on through larges, mediums, which are 200 to 400 barrels a day, smalls, and then dogs. So the point I want to make is that this play, in terms of the vertical developments, had two hot spots. You have a hot spot here in the Fort Trinidad area field, and then you had another one way south, right near the Mexican border in Maverick County. Everything else was pretty much small potatoes for the Buda Georgetown. What happened is as oil prices rose, you can see here that from both a gas perspective on the bottom as well as an oil perspective on the top, you had very strong growth, but the volumes are pretty slow, pretty meaningless. It was growing fast, but it only really got to 20,000 barrels a day and 60 million cubic feet a day for the vertical wells. However, when you think about this, drilling a vertical well here is going to, if pop off 400 to 800 barrels a day. That's quite the feat. Highly economic, and you can see why it was growing fast. Last point to mention is the cast of players here. If you look at these operating, it's Pardis, Sem operating, and Burke Royalty. In other words, this is dominated by a bunch of privates who are now operating most of these vertical. Let's move on now and look at the horizontals only. Here they are all on a map. You can see the Texas coastline. So it goes all the way from that central Texas area right on down to the border. Now this is a quintile map, so we're only looking at the horizontals in this play and putting them on into basic 20% groups. Here's the best 20% of wells, the next, and worst. The thing I want to draw your attention to here is that this play is extremely localized. So if I take a look at this section down here, let's come on down to the south, you'll see there are a number of wells, a number of areas, small hotspots with consistently strong results. There's some there, a few more here. And not much in between. So sort of resembling more of a conventional sort of play. If we look at the situation up here on the top, we'll see a similar look with a bigger hotspot right here, probably the best portion of the play. Something up here, that's the ExxonMobil acreage, the little X's, and these over here, this is EOG's asset, okay? Now let's think about that in terms of the number of players in the play, and who are they? They're over here in the graph on the right. You can see them, and my point is that you have a very good diversity of people within the play. See if we can get all those names to appear. Now the point is the height of the bars, the well count. So I have a lot of players with 20 to 30, 40 horizontals in the play. I have a number of people who only have one or two wells or a handful of wells, and almost all are consistently poor. Okay, the leaders in the play are over here of the size. It's El Toro, it's Sage, CMR, EOG, Hawkwood, and Anadarko. So we're looking at a couple of people. The single largest player is CML, and you can see ExxonMobil also has a fairly considerable position in the play. The point I want to make is this play has a pretty good mix of publics, mostly privates, but a number of people who have taken a whack at this play. Now, the key though to this play is looking at the trends. So let's do that. This is one of the more interesting lateral length charts I've ever seen. First thing you want to note is that this goes from 2001 all over here, and you can see the dots are individual wells. The point I want to make is that this play pioneered horizontals along with its cousin, the Austin Chalk, and frankly, you were drilling 4,000 and 5,000, you went down, which has really kind of surprised me. And then now it's been rocketing up, and the play is now host to quite a number of wells above 9,000, even as much as 12,000 lateral feet. So people are using extended laterals in the play in the last couple of years to try to get more value out of it. The most important chart for me, however, is this one. This is a look at my peak per lateral foot. This is a problem for Buda Georgetown players. Now, granted, there are a number of wells with pretty cheap cost, and you can see some great results. By way of reference, if you score a 150 on this scale of peak per lateral foot, 20 to 1 per 1,000 feet, that would put you in the top quintile of the Eagleford. Okay, so at the same cost, all of these wells would qualify as top quintile in the Eagleford. But unfortunately, as you can see, you've got a situation where the peak per lateral foot has been declining. The other thing that I see here is that it hasn't been, activity really fell off during 2016, and since it's picked up in 2017 and 18, it really hasn't come down and is now posting numbers that are quite low. If I look at, interesting also, the players. I have CML still active. ExxonMobil came and went. Hawkwood Energy came and went. Okay, Vertex came and went. So it's a lot of people who have abandoned the play. Even EOG has not drilled a well in the play, despite some pretty good results here, but also a handful of not so great results. Hasn't drilled a well in a while. So this is a play I see as having a situation where it's just not keeping up and should probably remain minor. The final proof of that is this, so here is a look at that same line I just showed you. I've removed the well level detail just to make clear. And you can see the fall off I was talking about in that trend line the computer's drawing. And the point I want to make is that's contrasting with the Woodbine, which is slightly but slowly improving, and particularly the Austin Chalk, which is really taken off. So as a final sort of message, I want to just go over these key conclusions. We broke out the Buda Georgetown. It's got about 2,300 wells. The footprint is interesting. If you have Buda Georgetown exposure, you probably are not in the heart of the Eagleford. So it's not going to double your exposure as you might get with the Austin Chalk if you have great Austin Chalk. In Central Texas, it often does overlap with the Woodbine, but interestingly, the operators that are pursuing the Georgetown Buda are different from the operators of the Woodbine Eaglebine. And lastly, it doesn't extend into that central Louisiana portion. We've seen it be a very spotty play, and while it can be great, while we have some wells that have break-evens in the 20s, they are quite condensed. It's more like a conventional play, and wells on the margin typically fall off dramatically. And finally, it's really failed to show the improvement. Despite drilling quite long, the play has not been able to raise the lateral length, raise the productivity per foot. As a result, we think that this is a play that's not going to be another Austin Chalk or Woodbine. It's not going to really improve the inventory of the people that are exposed to it and will likely remain marginal. Thank you very much.